Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you will find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner with the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we introduce you to Robot Rickshaw, who you may have seen peddling his unique brand of avant-garde electronica around Duluth. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. To tell us more about who, or maybe what, Robot Rickshaw is, I'm joined by Duluth News Tribune reporter Joe Bowen. Joe, welcome to the Northlandia podcast.
Thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Now, before we really get into it, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here, here's a quick sample of his unique brand of music. So, Joe, before we really get into who and what Robot Rickshaw is, maybe tell us about what about the story interested you in the first place.
Well, what interested me, I suppose, is it kind of jumped out to me when we have a story list for Northlandia. Just, here's a whole bunch of people that could be good subjects for these. And Robot Rickshaw was one of the few that I had kind of heard about before we ever started Northlandia as a series. So it jumped out from that little list there just because I think it was somebody at a bar had just said, hey, do you know there's a guy in a gas mask who kind of wanders around Duluth with this big rig full of electronic instruments, just blaring them, talking to people, having a good time. And that stuck out to me. That I immediately knew I bet that's who that Robot Rickshaw guy is on our list of story ideas. And then the other reason it kind of stood out to me as something I really wanted to pursue is that there's what we call a news peg there too, which basically means there's a verb in that figurative sentence, so to speak. A lot of our Northlandia stories are kind of just about a thing that maybe you know about, maybe you don't, but there's not necessarily, for lack of a better term, an excuse to write about them. They're not necessarily observing an anniversary or doing something new or different. They're just kind of continuing to do their own thing. And one of the reasons I really wanted to pursue the Robot Rickshaw story is there is that verb there. He is rebuilding his rig. He's done with the rickshaw, or at least has taken it apart. He ritualistically destroyed it during a performance last year and is now kind of putting it back together, but in three different sections, so to speak. So he's got a shoulder-mounted harnessy thing. He's got a pedicab, like what you might I think New York City has a lot of them. Sorry, it's been a while. And then a catamaran that he powers with little bicycle pedals. So there's a verb to that sentence, and that's part of the reason I thought it was interesting is rather than just saying, here's a thing that exists, it's here's a thing that is changing,
Yeah, well, it's definitely an interesting story to pursue.
Thanks.
For sure. And to actually give context for what Joe just talked about, maybe it's time we introduce you to who Robot Rickshaw actually is, but who better to describe him than to have him describe himself?
So I'm Troy Rogers. I'm a composer, musical roboticist, semi-nomadic robot herder, and I'm also known as Robot Rickshaw, mainly because of my project, which is literally a rickshaw, a two-wheeled cart full of robots that play music. Except I'm moving away from that original concept and putting the robots on some other platforms right now.
Yeah, Joe, so you and I spoke to him for quite a while there, but tell me about how did he become the Robot Rickshaw?
Well, it's kind of a confluence of factors, I guess. He'd been interested in musical composition and went to school for music composition, like undergrad and that sort of thing, and kind of gradually got more and more involved in musical robots. So his first one that he ever made was a solenoid attached to a pencil that he basically programmed using a microcontroller to strategically thwap the top of a balloon that was stretched over a steel mixing drum. And it kind of, for lack of a better term, mushroomed from there. So, he made more and more complicated robots. And he had a decent amount of them in this place he was staying at in Park Point, it sounds like. And basically a couple times kind of throughout his career, I guess, had this idea of, why don't I take my robots for a walk? He was saying when he was living in Virginia and studying there, Virginia, the state, that he basically wanted to take his robots to a gallery that was down the street and thought, well, maybe I could take them on a walk and actually play them, that sort of thing. But he never really realized until he lived here and just got the idea in his head and started making the rickshaw. It took him several months. He did a beer fast while he was doing that because the rickshaw is heavy, so that you need to kind of get in shape to push it around. Duluth's got hills. It's, there's a reason there's not a lot of pedal cabs and stuff like that around here, right? And so he got in shape, lost a lot of weight, and basically just decided to kind of take it into Canal Park. He crossed the aerial lift bridge, and that was his transformation story, so to speak.
Yeah, and it sounds like he went on a really interesting journey in general. He originally went out there to Virginia as he's pursuing his master's degree, his dissertation. He just talked about how he kind of had a change from the academic side to more wanting to be on the performing side.
Yeah, moving in front of the camera, so to speak.
at the time, I'm a grad student, I'm a PhD student. I get back, I'm going to finish my program, and with the intention of, still most of the best chance of realizing some of these ideas seem to be like, okay, get a gig at a research institution that has a music department and hopefully start my own lab in robotics. And the situation in academia in that time is not, I wasn't going to have my own lab right away. One of my collaborators now, both of them do, but I saw that I was interested in really pushing the music side, and it's really difficult to do both. I foresaw if I became a researcher in musical robotics, I might not get to spend that much time making music. And so I left. I had a chapter of a dissertation left, and I kind of left my program and moved to Duluth.
So Joe, just a little bit earlier, you mentioned a story about how he kind of smashed his robots. You kind of want to explain what that's all about, what the context is for that?
Sure. So he's made these new robots, right? And part of the reason for that is at Homegrown Music Festival, one every spring here in Duluth. He was performing at Vikra, I don't know how you pronounce it, the fancy distillery in Canal Park there. And the way he kind of describes it, he was partly impulsive, but he had this kind of feeling for a while.
So, it was something that was improvisational, but it came from this feeling. And I think, later I revisited Buckminster Fuller and Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, where he writes very, very opening paragraph. I forgot completely about it, but the very first thing he's talking about, human capacity for evolution, whether it's utopia or oblivion, either choice is available. And the first thing he says is, humans are so creative and ingenuitive. If you're caught in a shipwreck, you might find a buoyant piano lid and use it as a life raft and survive. The problem comes in when we grip onto life rafts, provisional life rafts that no longer serve us. And I think that happens a lot with technology. I think so many of the technologies that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, whether it's an ATM or social media, those things got built to serve a certain purpose at a certain time, and culture moves on and discovers what these things are and changes as a result. And I think there's a great there's a danger to gripping on, and so I think that impulse really was to break out of that and just start from scratch with, what do I know now? After 20 years of this, it's not what I knew before I started taking them for walks on the street.
So while he's performing at Vikra, he's kind of wrapping up his set, or at least he did wrap it up by doing this. He was holding a hatchet and basically just smashed the hell out of his rig with this hatchet. He's got one drum kit that he attached with the hatchet. He smashed all the different drums there, put these big old holes in the skin, I think it's called. And then he's got another kind of makes guitar-like noises called Ami. He hit that a few times, and then he actually smashed the laptop that controlled the whole rig. And at least partly, he was telling me today that the laptop itself was kind of cruising for a bruising, because he didn't like that he was trying not to update his Mac OS on it, but it auto-updated anyway. And that was something that kind of annoyed him. I mean, that wasn't the whole reason, of course, but one of the things that he really likes about kind of this new iteration, at least what he's trying to do, is have it be more completely under his control. Having the Apple Corporation be partly in charge of his art, I think, is something he's trying to avoid. And it was, maybe still is, at least until he's able to get everything on, Linux of some kind.
Well, to me, it sounds like he kind of carried out what many of our dark fantasies are when we're angered with our computers, except he literally did it. He literally took a hatchet and went to town on it.
Office Space in real life, yeah.
Basically. So talking about how is he remaking them right now?
Well, he's got a shop in kind of on that pier in Duluth there. It's part of a broader artist collective. And what he's doing is he's taking the Rickshaw rig and kind of setting that to one side, and he's kind of making 3 new or at least reused rigs. So there's a kind of this shoulder-mounted thing, kind of like the top half of a backpack straps that he's used a few other times, but he says he's basically kind of redoing a lot of it. It's essentially new or very close to new. And then he's got a pedicab, I guess they're called. It's like a bicycle in the front, but then it's like a 3-wheeled bicycle sort of thing that you use to schlep people around. And then he's making a water-based one, a catamaran, where it's the idea is like he kind of sits in the middle of it and then kind of pedals to make it go. So, and the idea there is all the different musical robots he's making, at least hopefully, are going to be modular. So he can attach different robots to any of those frames, kind of depending on, you know, what the occasion is, what the mood is, whatever. And so the idea is maybe one day he wants to put on the slide whistle vest and the helmet that's a pipe organ that shoots fire, and he could just kind of put those on and go. You know, it's maybe not as simple as like slipping on clothes, so to speak, but that's kind of the metaphor he was using.
The robot rickshaw, you know, the rickshaw was, you know, maybe I won't even say platform number 1, you know, it's all beta, but it's moving in a direction. One direction is where, you know, it can be on a boat and it's its own vehicle, you know, the bike or the boat. So that's kind of a stream. And then this vector really, you know, what I want to be able to do is put these things on and take them off like clothes. Like one day, like literally the ensemble of the day is the ensemble.
Well, Joe, is there anything else that you think people should know about Robot Rickshaw, or anything else that you took away from it from our time with him?
I mean, maybe not know about him, but one of the kind of thoughts that I kept having, especially after, you know, we were kind of rounding the 90-minute mark of talking to Troy there. He's like a really fascinating guy. He's got a lot to say about his work and stuff, is that, you know, I talk to a decent amount of artists just like in my personal life and, you know, people in general. And it seems like there are a lot of people who are weird, quote unquote, because they are seeking weirdness in their personal or professional life. And they just kind of throw stuff into, you know, a figurative like pot of boiling water, right? And they're like, well, I don't want to explain it because then it would mess with the artistic value, sort of a thing. And that's a valid approach. But one of the reasons I really kind of like talking to Troy and really kind of like doing this story, one of my big takeaway, I guess, is that he struck me more as someone who is just pursuing something that he really likes and really thinks is interesting and thinks is important. And it's kind of, I think it is a weird thing, but I don't think he's setting out to do weird stuff. I think it's much more, this is stuff I like doing. This is stuff that I think is, you know, maybe even going to be helpful. And it just happens to be weird, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But that's the impression I got. There's a quote, I think it was Frank Zappa said something like, I never set out to be weird. Other people called me weird. And I get the impression that the same might be true for the Robot Rickshaw.
All right, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, Joe, for bringing the story to us. We look forward to seeing what you have for us next time on Northlandia.
Hey, no problem. I look forward to being here again.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, as well as see photos by Jed Carlson and video produced by myself, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. In next week's episode of Northlandia, we're joined by News Tribune reporter Terry Caddo, who introduces us to a Gilbert, Minnesota resident who lives in what used to be a fuel oil delivery service and gas station. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe could have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnew's.com. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.